What's up? What's up? Welcome to Hatman Strikes Back Daily Boxing News. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Had a little hiccup yesterday or in the early hours of this morning, actually, depending on where you are in the world. I started a live stream for the Virgil Ortiz, Lubin fight, and there was a power cut and the backup solar batteries in the place where I'm staying were also flat. So yeah, that was the end of that idea, but didn't really matter in the end because the fight only lasted 2 rounds. And in fact, that's what we'll talk about first, is the Virgil Ortiz, Lubin fight. And the things that surprised me about that fight. First of all, shout out to Gordon Dalglish in the chat. He's the only person in the chat room right now. So big up Gordon Dalglish. Guess I'm catching people a little off guard. Big up Chicken and Waffles. He says, evening Hatman, we getting any Partridge fans making fake birth certificates again? We shall see. 27 concurrent viewers. Big up everyone. Just joining the live stream, locking in. Let me know if you can hear me loud and clear. You should be able to. So yeah, we'll talk about the Virgil Ortiz, Lubin fight, which took place last night. And of course, from tomorrow, we've got the Eubank Jr. Conor Benn rematch fight week. We could talk about that. Big up Johnny Gaffer, Truth Channel, Simon Jones, what's up? How you guys doing? How's your weekend been? Let me know in the live chat. Got people just tuning in right now. Give it a few minutes before we get into the topics. We can also talk about some non-boxing related stuff once we've got through with the boxing talk, if you guys wish. Gordon Dalglish says it's rainy here. We got Matt Borgerson for the super chat. He says Lubin was Dylan White, washed at 30 years old. That's wild. Big up Arco. So let's get into the Lubin performance against Virgil Ortiz. Switch up the visuals here. So a lot of the time you get American fight fans and also boxing pundits, trainers and whatnot who kind of scoff at fights in the UK which get a lot of attention that aren't necessarily the highest level fights. It might be a name brand up against a nobody, or a name brand against an also-ran, or somebody that's way over the hill. And it'll be on pay-per-view, or if not pay-per-view, it'll be filling out some arena or stadium, and you'll get American fans, or, as I say, boxing pundits, trainers, etc. saying, what's that all about? Why are they getting so excited over a rubbish fight, basically, or a mediocre fight? Well, I find it kind of ironic that there were so many people stateside that were excited for Ortiz versus Lubin. Big up Matt. I know Matt actually picked Lubin to pull the upset over Ortiz, not to put you on blast, my brother, but it's kind of a similar thing with this fight as to what we see in the UK, because there are a lot of UK fights, don't get it twisted, where it isn't a high-level fight and it does get a lot of attention. I mean, you look at Dave Allen, Johnny Fisher, people like that, who get a lot of attention and they aren't high-level fighters. I don't see any issue with it as long as the fans know exactly what they're paying for, right? And the boxing culture in the UK is such that fighters of a relatively low level, if they have a personality that resonates with the public, will get a lot of support. And even more so if they have a fighting style that resonates with the public. Just look at Derek Chisora. Look at all the losses on his record. And yet the public still come out, pay their money to watch him fight, right? It's grassroots support for boxing, basically. So, yeah, Virgil Ortiz versus Erickson Lubin, I really didn't think much of the fight going in. I've never really rated Lubin very highly. If you look at Lubin's record, I mean, he was stopped by Jamel Charlo in 2017. We're talking about, 8 years ago. He was then stopped by Sebastian Fondora 3 years ago. And in the meantime, he really hasn't done anything. I mean, who's Erickson Lubin ever beat? Jason Rosario might be his best win. Rosario was never that good. So look, I get it. It's a business. You're going to hype a fight up if you make the fight. But I always saw it as a foregone conclusion for Virgil Ortiz. I would have been very surprised if Erickson Lubin beat Virgil Ortiz. Even the best version of Lubin you could imagine. If he'd beaten Ortiz, I would have been very surprised. So the fight was over before it started. Lubin was moving around a little bit in round one, and he's always been chinny, Lubin. And that was one of the reasons why I was so sure, truth be told, that Virgil Ortiz was going to win the fight. As soon as he lands on Lubin's chin, surely it's over. That's what I was thinking. But it is boxing at the end of the day. I couldn't count Lubin out completely. He can dig a bit. He did have the proverbial puncher's chance, but I thought it would be like catching lightning in a bottle, to be honest. So, second round comes, and Lubin seemingly voluntarily moves back to the ropes. And he's fighting Virgil Ortiz off the ropes. And it just looked like he was inviting disaster. Because Virgil Ortiz can punch. He's pretty accurate. He had Lubin, again, pinned up against the ropes, but Lubin apparently decided to do that. I didn't see anything that preceded him moving to the ropes to make me think that it was involuntary. I didn't see him getting hurt or whatever the case may be, or some type of leg injury. I didn't see anything like that. Maybe I missed it. It seemed like a terrible tactical decision in the moment from Erickson Lubin. It's like that line from the movie, is it Magnum Force with Clint Eastwood, where he says, a man's got to know his limitations. And that was an example of Erickson Lubin apparently not knowing his limitations, or at least not knowing the extent of Virgil Ortiz's strengths. Why would you back up to the ropes so early in a fight against a guy like Virgil Ortiz when he's a puncher and you've got a weak chin? It don't make any sense. Not like Lubin's some defensive genius. So it was a strange tactical decision by Lubin to do that. And he paid for it because Virgil Ortiz said, thank you very much. Started unloading the heavy artillery. And unsurprisingly, sooner rather than later, big shots started detonating on Lubin's chin. And he was basically out on his feet. Ortiz put the combination together. The referee stepped in. I got no issue with the referee's decision because Lubin was out of it. And he's got a history of, as I say, being chinny. So there you go. That's what you get. F around and find out. Play stupid games. You win stupid prizes. And Erickson Lubin won a very, very stupid prize there with the way he fought against Virgil Ortiz. So it was what it was. Big up Matt for the super chat. Big up Swaggins for the super chat too. Big up yourself, sir. Matt says, after that performance, I can see Virgil Ortiz beating the hell out of Boots, honestly. He seems more dimensional, more adjustments, etc. Yeah, let's talk about Boots as well. I should have done some visuals for that fight. Big up David Fisher, big up Fight News, big up AJ, big up... Who else we got here? Yeah, big up Arco already. Ryan Nemus. So, let's talk about Boots, because they did face off after the fight. Virgil Ortiz and Boots. I think that it's a very, very interesting fight. If Boots had better defense, I'd be confidently picking him to beat Vergil Ortiz. And one of the reasons is that Ortiz is relatively low volume. I know that sounds strange for a guy, saying that about a guy who just won by second round TKO. But if you watch him against Madrimov, if you watch many of Vergil Ortiz's fights, he doesn't throw that many shots. And that's one of the things that actually frustrates me about Ortiz a little bit. Is he'll move around the ring and he just won't let his hands go. Sometimes he'll come alive in the second half of fights, but in the first half of fights, he's very, very conservative with his output. That's just the way he is. And I can see a guy like Boots taking advantage of that. Boots does let his hands go, And being better hydrated at 154, I think he's going to have more energy than he did at 147. So, yeah, I could see Boots beating Ortiz, but Boots does have these defensive lapses quite frequently. And so I reckon that fight might be a battle of two halves, where Boots is getting the better of it early, but in the second half, maybe Ortiz starts to come on strong a little bit. So I see that as a real, real good fight. I don't see either guy washing the other, personally. If I had to lean slightly towards somebody, I would lean slightly towards Boots. Ever so slightly towards Boots. Maybe beating Ortiz on points. Yeah, I'd say Boots on points maybe. But I think it's a real, real tough fight. A pick'em. But Boots Ennis for me, ever so slightly. Big up Matt for the super chat. He says, we saw the real Boots in the Karen rematch. Everyone forgot. He's not as good as Ortiz. It's very obvious to me Ortiz is the next Canelo. Yeah, I see it as a much closer fight. I think that Boots was drained in that Karen rematch at 147. I think the real Boots was in his last two fights when he fought Stanionis and his first fight at 154. I think personally that was the real Boots. And yeah, I reckon it's a 50-50 maybe, or I want to say 52-48 type fight with Ortiz, in my personal, humble opinion. I've got Boots as a slight favorite over Ortiz, but we'll see. I could be totally wrong. Wouldn't be the first time. Shout out to Matt, much appreciated, my brother, for the super chat. Matt also says, not gonna lie, the fight isn't happening anytime soon anyways. Well, there is this narrative that both sides are pushing, that the other guy or the other side maybe don't want it. I suspect the fight will happen sooner rather than later. And the reason I say that is to kind of piggyback off something Eddie Hearn said in recent interviews. DAZN are pushing for it, right? DAZN have got both fighters and they are trying to drive subscriptions. They're also trying to justify putting so many pay-per-views on. So I think there will be impetus from within that organization to make fights like this sooner rather than later. So again, I could be totally wrong, Matt, but I suspect that Boots Ennis versus Vergil Ortiz will happen within the next 12 months, maybe even the next 6 months. I suspect that's going to happen. Striker says, I think Boots is going to stop him personally. Graham says, do you think Erickson Lubin is shot? I don't know whether he's shot or not. I'm not going to make any assertions about that. I just don't think Erickson Lubin was ever that good. I don't think Erickson Lubin would have beaten any version of Vergil Ortiz personally. Oh, wow. Matt says, Oscar literally shut it down at the presser. But how much does Oscar really have? How much control does Oscar De La Hoya really have? That's what I will say. He'll shoot it down. Okay. But how much control does he really have? Oscar De La Hoya's, even though he is the Golden Boy and that's the name of his company, he's more like a front man. That's my perception anyway. So he can say all this stuff, but once DAZN start putting the pressure on him, I reckon he's going to yield. But again, I could be totally wrong. We'll see. Maybe it's wishful thinking on my behalf, but that's my suspicion, that the fight will happen at the latest in the next 12 months, but maybe even in the next 6 months. We'll see. Big up, Matt. John says, yo, Hatman, what's your take on Catterall versus Echo? Could be closer than people think. That's an interesting fight, you know. Tony S says, can see Boots pulling out. Yeah, pullouts always, you know, can certainly always happen in any fight. Tony says, I have no confidence Ortiz versus Boots will happen next. They're going to stretch it out as long as they can as per usual, pricing each other out, pulling out with injuries, etc., getting sick of it. I mean, if you go by the history of boxing over the past, let's say, 15 years, then it's totally understandable why you'd think that, particularly through the Mayweather era. We got that so often. But I do think things have shifted over the past 3 years or so, 2-3 years, with Turki Al-Sheikh coming into boxing, with DAZN becoming a near monopoly in terms of broadcasting. I don't think we're in a different space now where there's more pressure on fighters to actually get in the ring and provide the fans with the type of fights that they want. Broadcasters are under pressure to provide content to justify all these pay-per-views, because DAZN just announced their elite tier, whatever they're going to call it, and it basically, as part of a subscription price, gives you a minimum of 12 pay-per-views a year. Well, that's one pay-per-view a month minimum, right? If DAZN are going to be doing one pay-per-view a month minimum, then they're going to need to come up with the fights. Do you know what I mean? So again, I could be totally wrong. Maybe Tony S and Matt are going to be proven right, but I suspect we will see. Despite what Oscar De La Hoya is saying, I suspect we will see Boots Ennis versus Virgil Ortiz in the very near future. I suspect within the next 6 months, maximum next 12 months. I reckon we're going to see it. And yeah, my prediction would be Boots Ennis to win the fight on points in a very close contest. But big up Matt and big up Tony S. Hussein says, Hatman, big up, do you think Joshua versus Fury will ever happen? It's really all down to Fury. Yeah, it's all down to Luke Partridge. It's not down to AJ. It's not down to Eddie Hearn. It's not even down to Frank Warren. It's all down to Luke Partridge. He's the one holding up that fight. And to be honest with you, I think he's always been the one holding up the fight. I think he's always been the one, apart from a brief window after AJ lost to Usyk the second time, where I think Fury genuinely wanted it. He saw an opportunity when AJ was down bad, psychologically. I think he saw an opportunity there to take the fight. And in that instance, in my opinion, AJ didn't want it. It was too soon after losing to Usyk. His confidence was on the floor. But outside of that period, I think it's always been Fury that has been the problem in making the fight and not AJ or Eddie Hearn. And I think it's the same now. So if Luke Partridge decides he wants to fight, then the fight will happen. I think it's that simple. Tony S says, I miss Turkey. He seems to have gone silent. Yeah, he is kind of conspicuous in his absence, isn't he, Turki Al-Sheikh? Hasn't been doing as much media and whatnot. Maybe he's not happy with DAZN because he says he was pushing for no more pay-per-views and that hasn't happened. He does have, or the Saudis have, some type of stake in DAZN, but it's a minority stake. When you're a minority shareholder, you're not going to have the final say. Do you know what I mean? You have a say, you have a seat at the table, but it's not going to be the final say. Especially since they don't appear to be pumping in the same amounts of money, into boxing as they were a year or so ago. Supersized Fry says, how many of you seen the new DAZN plan that includes all pay-per-views, no additional fee for the pay-per-view? Yeah, just spoke about that a few minutes ago, yeah. Their premium gold tier, whatever they're calling it, yeah. Just spoke about that. Big up Supersized Fries. Abdi says, I just don't see it with Boots. Got talent but questionable defense. I do see it with Boots. When he's fully hydrated. Yeah, the defense is not there, let's be real. You're not going to turn a guy like Boots ever into a Mayweather, a Whitaker, even a Terence Crawford defensively. He's always going to have those lapses and those holes there. But from an athletic point of view, from an offensive point of view, Boots has got it. He's very fast, he's powerful, he's explosive, he can take a shot. It's just as well that Boots has got a good chin because of that leaky defense he's got. Boots is one of these guys whose offense is really his defense, yeah? When he's fully hydrated and he's energized and he can maintain distance between himself and his opponent and control the range by using his feet and his quickness, then he doesn't get hit that much. But when he's weight drained, his legs are a lot slower and he's forced to slug up close. And that's when the holes in his defense become a lot more apparent. Fight News made a good point there. He says Ortiz had questionable moments also. He gets dropped. Well, we remember the Boachuk fight, right? A lot of people thought that Ortiz was fortunate to get, fortunate not to lose the Boachuk fight. So yeah, he has questionable. Tony S says, I have a horrible feeling that a fight on the November 22nd card will get called off due to something or other. This is why I'm hesitant to get DAZN. We hardly ever get a full card we were promised. Well, the question is why? Is it just random bad luck? Because there are injuries. It's a contact sport at the end of the day. People can get sick. It happens. But perhaps fighters pull out for other reasons as well. Maybe to get better offers elsewhere. Maybe they pick up an injury in camp. So on and so forth. Big up Danny. Buenas noches. Fight News says, I think he got dropped by Mean Machine too, but he didn't call it. So let's move on to fight week for this Eubank Jr. Conor Benn rematch. As many other people have said, there isn't the same energy for this rematch as there was for the first fight. There hasn't been the drama with the dad admonishing members of the media for supporting that first fight, saying that his son's a disgrace and all this other drama. That helped to sell the fight. There's been none of that this time. And you do wonder how many people are going to watch it compared to the first one. What do you guys think? You got Eubank Jr. back with Bomac. I personally think that's a good move. I think they work well together in that Liam Smith rematch. I liked the way he approached that fight. Striker says the face-off between Eubank and Benn was awful. Benn trying too hard. I actually didn't watch it. I watched about 30 seconds of it, then I switched it off. I just wasn't interested. Green says, what do you think of this opinion? I think Eubank will make weight but ignore the rehydration and take the fine. He'll come in fresh for the fight and knock out Benn. I think it would be a prudent thing for him to ignore the rehydration clause, to be honest, because it was something which was, as I understand it, the way that Eubank Jr. dropped the information on it, it was something which was sprung on him at the last moment in negotiations. Because bear in mind, the way that these Saudi fight cards are put together is very different to a traditional fight card where you'll get negotiations directly between the two teams. With the Saudi cards, both sides negotiate with the Saudis. They don't negotiate with each other. And so I always wondered whether Eubank Jr. signed for the Benn fight, right? And the first fight I'm talking about, obviously, and then Benn was able to put the rematch clause in afterwards. And because Eubank Jr. had already signed to fight, he basically couldn't pull out legally. Do you know what I mean? Because again, it's an unusual situation where Benn's side were negotiating with the Saudis, they weren't negotiating with Eubank. Maybe there was some type of clause in the Eubank end of the contract that allowed that rematch, that rehydration clause to be inserted at the last minute. Because as I say, Eubank Jr. made out as though that's not something that he signed up for originally. But because of the way those contracts are negotiated with the Saudis, the unusual nature of them, maybe it allows for such a thing. So yeah, I reckon it would be prudent of him to ignore the rehydration clause. Just make 160, then rehydrate to whatever he wants. Or maybe ignore both. Graham says, Eubank is shot in my opinion. AJ says, I keep forgetting the fight is around the corner. Strange lack of excitement. Yeah, it's next weekend. It's next weekend. I agree with Fight News. Really didn't need an immediate rematch. I don't feel like it warranted it. I feel like Eubank Jr. won fair and square first time. Okay, it was a good fight, but it's not a fight that advances Conor Benn's career. You know, I was quite interested in seeing Conor Benn at 147 against some of the champions. You take Boots Ennis out of the equation and Terence Crawford out, they're both moved up. It's a very open division, 147 pounds right now. If there was ever a chance of Conor Benn winning a legitimate world title, surely it's now at 147. But he's jeopardizing that opportunity to jump up several weight classes and have this novelty fight, and in this case, a novelty rematch with Chris Eubank Jr. To me, it was always a strange scenario. It makes more sense for Eubank Jr. because he doesn't appear to have any interest in fighting for a world title at 160 or even 168, unless it's some super fight against Canelo. Well, Canelo's no longer champion, of course, but you know, up until Canelo lost his belts to Crawford, that's the only world title fight that Eubank Jr. seemed interested in. A world title, because it's a money fight first and foremost, the world title was just a secondary factor. So because Eubank Jr. doesn't appear interested in world titles, then a Conor Benn fight kind of made sense. Because it's a big money fight for him, and that's what he's after. Now, obviously, it's a big money fight for Conor Benn too, but he has more chance, in my estimation anyway, or had more chance to actually win legitimate world title, world titles at 147. He's a lot younger than Eubank Jr. He's still in his 20s, and he's in a weak division. So Yeah, he seems to be potentially throwing away the opportunity to chase this novelty fight. Yeah, I would certainly have picked Benn over Barrios if they'd gone straight into that one. Barrios is a very, very poor champion. And now, obviously, at 147, Lewis Crocker is one of the belt holders as well. Big up Ayed in the chat. Hans says, I thought the bag was the main point. Well, yeah, the bag is the main point, but it makes more sense for Eubank because he's got no aspirations beyond making a bag. Whereas Conor Benn, if he doesn't have aspirations beyond making a bag in one fight, then I think he's selling himself short, to be honest, because I do think Conor Benn could have done damage at 147 had he stayed at that weight class against the Barrioses of the world, the Lewis Crockers of the world, Ennis maybe. I think he could have done damage against those guys. And in the long run, you're going to make a bag. It's not going to be just a 1 or 2 fight deal where you make big money. You make big money way beyond 1 or 2 fights if he'd pursued that particular avenue. The avenue he's gone down is smash and grab. It's short-term thinking. It's typical Eddie Hearn, actually. That's the way Eddie Hearn seems to be these days, or for the past few years. It's smash and grab. He doesn't believe in long-term investments and long-term payoffs. He wants to pay off immediately. And sometimes if you go for the long-term payoff, you make more money in the long run. Danny is picking Benn to stop Eubank second time around. In fact, let's get a show of hands. Who do you guys think is going to win this fight and by what method? That's right, Striker. Smash and grab is the matchroom strategy. And in fact, I want to talk about, just briefly, a comment that Eddie Hearn made about Kell Brook in a recent interview. He was talking about Kell Brook's mental health. And he said something which I think is very revealing. He said that Kell Brook's mental health was always an issue. I'm paraphrasing. He said Kell Brook's mental health was always an issue and always a worry. And that's why they put Kell Brook in certain fights. He didn't name the fight. But he said that's why they put Kell Brook in certain fights, because they wanted to get him paid before he potentially imploded. Now, I think that, and it's just my opinion, there was no real impetus to do what was best for Kell Brook and get him a big payday before he imploded. It was more about getting Matchroom a big payday before Kell Brook potentially imploded. Getting a return on their investment that they'd made in Kell Brook before he potentially imploded. It is a similar scenario, although not as extreme as the one I'm about to give, to when the Duvas put Tyrell Biggs in with Mike Tyson. Tyrell Biggs was only about 14-0, 15-0 as a pro. Yes, he was an Olympic super heavyweight gold medalist in 1984, but he also had a serious substance abuse problem from his amateur days. And he was not looking good as a pro. He nearly got beat by a guy called David Bay in the run-up to the Mike Tyson fight. And so he had this issue with crack cocaine, which his team were very concerned about. And so they decided to throw him in with Mike Tyson when he was far from ready. Because they thought, if we don't put him in with Tyson now, and this is again my opinion, if we don't cash him out now, he's going to get beat by a lesser opponent, and then the payday against Mike Tyson is going to go up in smoke. We won't get that return on our investment. And so that's why I think Eddie Hearn did with Kell Brook. In my opinion, I'm not an insider. I can't tell you any of this for certain. But in my opinion, what Eddie Hearn said in that interview was very revealing, where he came out and said, yeah, we wanted to get Kell Brook paid before he imploded due to his mental health, basically. No, I don't think it was about getting Kell Brook paid. I think it was about getting Matchroom paid before Kell Brook imploded. I don't think Eddie Hearn really cared about Kell Brook's well-being to that extent. Just my opinion. Elliot says, I don't forget PBC were never ever going to do deals with Brook while promoted by Hearn. Well, they did that one deal, but did that go to purse bids, the Sean Porter fight? I forget if that went to purse bids. Kell Brook was the mandatory for Sean Porter, right? I think he was anyway. Shout out to Feed Khabib. Feed Khabib says Frankie Gavin and that other guy were tragic defenses after he beat Porter. But Kell Brook did, to be fair to Matchroom, get an opportunity to fight Jesse Vargas. You guys remember that? That fight was made. And Kell Brook decided to turn that fight down in order to fight Golovkin for a lot more money. So that Jesse Vargas unification was there. He could have taken that instead. Could have taken that instead. It was far less money, way less money than the Golovkin fight, but it was there. Abdi says that Kell Brook story from the voice note will never get old. Danny says, do you think Eddie's relationship with AJ is genuine? Do I think that Eddie Hearn genuinely cares about AJ and they're good friends? Absolutely not. But I don't necessarily think AJ really buys into a friendship with Eddie Hearn either. You know? AJ seems to be a very insular guy. So I don't think I suspect anyway, I don't think he's actually that close with Eddie Hearn. Yeah, he signed a lifetime promotional deal with Eddie Hearn, which to me is bizarre, but he did so, from what I can recall, in exchange for Eddie Hearn taking far less of a percentage. So the standard promoter's fee is whatever it is, 20% or something. And I think AJ only gives Eddie Hearn about 10% or maybe less out of his purses because he signed that lifetime deal. Fight News says Triple G money wasn't worth it. Here's the thing though, right, about Kell Brook taking that Triple G fight. He probably was a ticking time bomb, Kell Brook. Yeah? And I don't know, it's hard to say how fights would have gone 147 pounds if he got him when he wanted him. Maybe he would have had the motivation, maybe he wouldn't, I don't know. But it's kind of like the Mike Tyson situation. There's so many what ifs from Mike Tyson fans. What if Cus D'Amato hadn't died? What if Jimmy Jacobs hadn't died? What if he'd stayed with Kevin Rooney? All these what ifs. And these what ifs do not factor in the basic nature and the essential character of Mike Tyson. When Jimmy Jacobs was still alive and Mike Tyson was still with Kevin Rooney, Larry Holmes predicted that Mike Tyson would implode. Right? That's when he was still with, minus Costamato, the Dream Team. But Larry Holmes could see Mike's character for what it was. He heard all the stories behind the scenes. He knew that it was only going to end up going one way. Right? And like I say, that's the thing that Mike Tyson fans totally ignore, is that this guy's character was such that, at least in Larry Holmes' opinion, and in my opinion too, he was always going to go that way. He was always going to implode. It was just a matter of time. It didn't matter whether Rooney was there or Jacobs was there or even Costamato. He was always going to implode. That's just the way Mike was wired. You know? And so perhaps it was the same situation for Kell Brook. Maybe Kell Brook was always going to be troubled, and that was going to be detrimental for his boxing career. Perhaps you could mitigate it a little bit, but ultimately, maybe that was always his fate or destiny. Danny says 10% is extortion from AJ's purses. We're talking $5+ million. $1 million will be more than enough for Eddie's services. Abdi says, do you think the Khan versus Brook fight would have went differently if they'd fought in their primes? I think it would have gone differently, but I still think Brook would have won. Personally. Fee Khabib says, Cos let Tyson get away with murder because of his talent, apparently. Yeah, he did. That has been said not only by Teddy Atlas, but also by Jose Torres. He said the same thing, that Cos would allow Mike to get away with all sorts of stuff just to achieve his objective of having another heavyweight champion, and the youngest heavyweight champion in history, again, because obviously he guided Floyd Patterson to the heavyweight title. And he remains the second youngest heavyweight champion in history, Floyd Patterson. Mental says, Mike was never the same after losing Costamato. But here's the problem, Mental. Costamato died before Mike Tyson won the world title. So are you saying that Mike Tyson was never the same before he even beat Berbick? You do realize that Cos died long before Mike Tyson won a world title, right? I think Cos died after Mike Tyson's 15th fight or something like that. Way, way before he won the world title. So I'm not sure about that claim right there. Costamato died of pneumonia very early on in Mike Tyson's career. MC says, what did he let Mike get away with? Well, all sorts of bad behavior, right? All sorts of bad behavior. Bullying people, intimidating teachers at school, all sorts of wild activity. He was going back to Brooklyn, and he says this now, he would go back to Brooklyn and start robbing people and all this other stuff with his old Brooklyn crew. He'd disappear. He was doing all sorts of stuff. Just being wild and disrespectful. And a lot of this was covered up by Costamato and whatnot. But I remember Jose Torres said that at one point, Cos got so frustrated with Mike's bad behavior, he actually offered to fight Mike. He literally went outside and called Mike out and said, let's fight. Since you think you're such a bad man, me and you fight. And according to Jose Torres, Cos was very serious. Mike didn't go for it. A strange, very strange scenario. Kind of like the owner of a pit bull trying to establish their dominance over the pit bull. The owner might not be a very big person and might know that that pit bull could rip them to shreds, but it's the psychological hold you have over that dog that makes the dog obey you, And so apparently Cos still had the psychological hold over Mike. But yeah, according to Jose Torres, Even Cuss was getting frustrated and whatnot by Mike's behavior. But Cus D'Amato had an objective. He wanted to stick it to the boxing establishment because basically Cus D'Amato, during his time, was marginalized by the boxing establishment, which at one point was mafia controlled. And Cus D'Amato grew up in a mob neighborhood. He was an Italian American himself, right? And he hated the mob. He was the mob stole a couple of his fighters, okay? He hated the mob, and he was paranoid about the mob. He thought the mob were out to actually assassinate him. So he used to, when he would come home, check under the bed for devices and look in the cupboard and all that kind of business. Oh yeah, Cus was very, very paranoid about the mob getting to him. So he was kind of marginalized by the boxing establishment, which had a lot of mob control and organized crime involvement. And he resented that. He resented that marginalization. And so Mike Tyson was basically his attempt at revenge on the boxing establishment. Yeah, that's what it was. And he wanted to fulfill that goal. No, I haven't yet caught AJ's interview of Lady Chan. Let me get that up now so I can watch it after the stream. Okay, it's from, hang on. Where's the interview here? Is it from 3 months ago where it says Anthony Joshua breaks his silence? Is that the one? Or is it more recent than that? So I'm seeing one here from 3 months ago. A live stream. Okay, that's the one. Yeah, I got that up. I'll listen to it after the stream. I'll watch it after the stream, excuse me. Fee Khabib says, Teddy Atlas had to pull a gun on Tyson for him harassing a female relative, a very underage female relative at that. That's right. Because Tyson is a very unsavory character. Adam says, Tyson became a bully post-prison. Holyfield then slayed the bully in 1995. I think Tyson was always a bully. I think Mike Tyson was the typical example of a victim turned bully. I'm sure many of us have seen these kind of people, right? In school when we were younger. The kid who got bullied the hell out of, one day he snaps and he becomes a super bully himself. Not always. Sometimes they snap and just learn to stand up for themselves and protect other kids from being bullied. But no, I've seen people go from being chronically bullied to become mega bullies themselves. And I think Mike Tyson was a great example of one of those people because he was a bully, a super bully. We all know the famous story of when one of his pigeons had his head ripped off, right, by some mean kid in the neighborhood that used to pick on him, and battered that kid in a fight. That was the straw that broke the camel's back for him, a turning point. But then Mike started victimizing other people himself. You know, he went from being the kid that got picked on to the kid who picked on people. And he carried that behavior through much of his professional career. Again, Mike Tyson described himself, not me. It's not me, my words. Mike Tyson described himself during his peak years as a megalomaniac. That's how he described himself, a megalomaniac. MC says, I get the sense you don't like Tyson, Hatman. You're totally wrong. As a fighter, Mike Tyson is my favorite heavyweight of all time. How can you not like a guy that's that exciting, that explosive and dynamic, and whose fights are that drama-filled? So no, totally wrong. I just like to be honest about who Mike Tyson was. Whereas the Mike Tyson fanboys live in this fantasy world where he's this perpetual victim, and they have every excuse in the book for all of his indiscretions and shortcomings as a fighter, which is just totally ridiculous. It's unfair on many of the guys that beat him. There's always some bizarre excuse for Mike Tyson losing a fight. They never look at the opponents and what they were going through. You know, Buster Douglas lost his mum, who he was very close to, 2 weeks before he fought Mike Tyson. But the narrative is all about, oh, Tyson didn't train for Buster Douglas and all that. Buster Douglas also was suffering from the flu. He was on medication. And his mum just died going into that Mike Tyson fight. So it's not like he was 100%, but he still turned up and did the job. But there's always excuses for Tyson, you know. So that's what I attack, is like the excuses and whatnot. Big up Philip. Answer in the chat. Well, yeah, Teddy Atlas was wise enough not to try and scare Mike Tyson without a weapon. Triple R says, Mike Tyson did not grape that woman, but he got away with loads of other stuff he did to women. Again, paraphrase Mike Tyson himself. Mike Tyson himself said, I'm paraphrasing here, but he's said words to the effect of, I've taken advantage of a lot of other women in the past, but I didn't take advantage of her. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean he graped other women and got away with it? There was that documentary, I think it was called Tyson, which came out many years ago now, where Mike Tyson said there are things that he's done that he will never speak about on camera that he's going to take to the grave. And this guy's openly spoken about a lot of stuff. So if there's stuff which is too extreme for him to talk about, like, what has this guy actually done? Do you know what I mean? But could you call it paradoxical thing about Mike Tyson is that his troubled mind is actually what made him so ferocious as a fighter. Actually what made him so exciting and so good as a fighter. If Mike Tyson was normal psychologically, there's a very good chance he wouldn't have been anywhere near as good as he was. So it's a interesting situation, right? It's like the flawed genius. The flaws are what make the diamond. Because people say, oh, what if this and what if that, and what if Mike Tyson had stayed on the straight and narrow? If he was able to stay on the straight and narrow, if he had the kind of mind that could stay on the straight and narrow, maybe he wouldn't have been as ferocious a fighter. Maybe his highs wouldn't have been as high. You see what I'm saying? Mike Tyson was an extremist. His highs were extremely high and his lows were extremely low. That's just the way he was wired, in my opinion. Big up AJ for the super chat. He says, The Tyson brand is so strong. My older brother, a very level-headed, shrewd guy, put money on him to KO Paul. It made me chuckle. And in fact, I want to do a video about that on Patreon. This notion that Mike Tyson threw the Jake Paul fight. To me, it's just bizarre. Of course, fights get thrown. Of course, in the world of YouTube boxing and social media, you need to be on your guard as far as, you know, whether a fight is on the up and up. But all you need to do, and I think it's been put back on YouTube now, is take a look at Mike Tyson's open workout on fight week. When he was hitting the pads in that open workout, okay? Anyone who knows anything about boxing that looked at Mike Tyson hitting the pads on fight week would have known that this guy is so shot, right? His legs are so shot that he wouldn't be able to win an area title. He'd lose at area level. I'm talking about in Britain now. If he were to fight an area level guy, he'd lose. Knees totally gone, reflexes totally gone. The guy's nearly 60 years of age. Hasn't looked after himself. Been bunning weed, do you know what I mean? For years since his retirement. Yo-yoing in weight. All sorts of injuries from when he was boxing. And that guy's going to come back and he's going to just be able to detonate on Jake Paul and knock him out whenever he wants. Absolutely bizarre, okay? And the narrative that was spun where Mike Tyson would go to throw a shot and then pull back at the last moment. Oh, he remembered that he wasn't supposed to knock Jake Paul out. That's why he's pulling the punches. I mean, total nonsense, man. There were moments when Mike would throw a shot and then hesitate because he knew the shot weren't going to land, because Jake Paul then started pulling away and Mike didn't want to get countered. It was very similar. If you watch Mike Tyson when he fought Kevin McBride. In the Kevin McBride fight, he was biting his glove. In the Lennox Lewis fight, he was biting his glove. In the Lennox Lewis fight, he would go to throw a shot, realize it weren't going to land, and then pull the shot back. He was doing that 20 years before the Jake Paul fight. What, did he throw those fights as well? Were they fixed? Is that where the Tyson fans are going with it? Were the McBride and Lewis fights fixed too? Unbelievable. Like I said, there's always some bizarre excuse for when Mike Tyson loses. Always some bizarre excuse. So big up AJ for the super chat. Much appreciated, my brother, and I completely agree with you. I've had people close to me who are big Mike Tyson fanboys. And there's no reasoning with them at all. There's no reasoning with them. Fee Khabib says, why was he biting the glove? Some kind of mental tick? It's just frustration. It's something he even did in the amateurs. Teddy Atlas spoke about it. It's something Mike Tyson used to do in the amateurs when he was frustrated in a fight. He would bite his glove because he couldn't get the shots off that he wanted to get off. He couldn't land the shots he wanted to land. He'd bite his glove out of frustration. Some fighters, and Mike Tyson has done it himself, would bite their opponent out of frustration. So, yeah, biting is something that Mike Tyson does when he's frustrated. Big up Seamus. Good to have you on board, my bro. How you doing? Yes, I did see the Don Charles interview. Thank you for reminding me about that, Tony. Yes, I saw the Don Charles interview. And I think Don Charles owes Spencer Fearon an apology. Yeah, Don Charles owes Spencer Fearon an apology. Because Spencer Fearon said that Don Charles needs to jump before he's pushed. He needs to leave Daniel Dubois before he gets his P45. before he gets his marching orders, because the writing's on the wall. Spencer Fearon was the one who got Don Charles that job in the first place. He was the one who recommended Don Charles as a trainer to Stan Dubois, Daniel's dad. And he says after the first Usyk fight, he fought for Don Charles' job. He fought for Don Charles to keep his job. I haven't heard Don Charles deny that happened. So Spencer Fearon was never coming from a place of hate when he said that Don's going to get sacked after Daniel lost that second Dubois fight. He's the guy that got you the gig in the first place. Why is he going to hate on you? It doesn't make any sense. But Don Charles basically insinuated that Spencer Fearon was doing the work of the devil by saying that he's going to get sacked. You know? The stuff he said about Spencer Fearon, I thought was very, very... I mean, the stuff that Don Charles said about Alexander Usyk was terrible. And post-fight, I'm talking about pre-fight, obviously. And post-fight, the stuff he was saying about Spencer Fearon, dear, oh dear, oh dear. That's the guy that actually got you the gig. And you're saying he's working for the devil. And I mean, what on earth is wrong with that guy? And of course, Spencer Fearon was proven to be right. Don Charles said he was shocked that he got sacked. The guy's, what, in his 60s or late 50s? Don Charles? How could you reach that age and have so much experience in boxing, having been sacked a number of times by Derek Chisora, and be so naive as to think that you wouldn't or couldn't get sacked by Stan Dubois following that second Usyk loss? Like, it's baffling, man. It's so baffling that Don Charles could say it was a shock and a surprise when he got his P45 from Stan Dubois. Like, what on earth is that guy on? Very, very strange. Yes, Mr. Lucas. Don Charles is saying he was shocked that he got sacked. Yeah, man said he was shocked. Fee Khabib says, did David Haye give Don CTE when he levered him at that presser in Germany? I think Dom's always been a silly individual, a pompous individual. That's the best way I describe Don Charles's personality. He's a very pompous man. Very, very pompous and silly. Overly emotional. Ed says, why do you call Don Charles' son Abdi? Because he looks Somali. If you didn't know that he was Don Charles' son, as in half Nigerian, half white, you just assume he was Somali and his name was Abdi. Because Abdi is like one of the most common names for Somali guys. So many of them are called Abdi. So yeah, Don Charles' son looks Somali. It says it's Don Charles. Yeah, Don Charles is Nigerian. Tony S says, Don Charles said the Dubois' dad doesn't pick his phone up anymore. Yeah, I completely agree. And that's what I was saying in the run up to that Usyk rematch is that if Don Charles and his son were hoping with their antagonistic behavior to get some type of psychological edge over Usyk, I said in the run up to the fight, it's going to backfire. You're not going to beat Usyk by trying to get under his skin and make him angry. All you're doing is giving him motivation. Understand the archetype that you're dealing with in Alexander Usyk. You're not dealing with the guy with a massive inflated ego. Don't get it twisted. Usyk's got a big ego, right? But what I'm saying is, he's not one of these guys who's got this massive inflated ego where he's not used to criticism and he's not used to being challenged and all that kind of thing. And if you do challenge him, if you do criticize him, it's going to throw him off his game and he's going to, fight recklessly. No, that's not who he is. Usyk is not Goliath, he's David. You see, Don Charles and his son perhaps thought that they were dealing with Goliath, right? The bully archetype. No, you're not dealing with the bully archetype. You're dealing with David. You're dealing with the guy who's smaller, who's used to being underestimated and being the underdog, who takes down the bullies. He's the one that's used to people trying to intimidate him. He's the one that's used to people trying to upset him, get under his skin, so on and so on. He's used to that. His whole career from the amateurs, he's been dealing with that. Well, you think it's the first time he's come up against cocky members of his opponent's team? And I mean, come on now. For those who don't know, and I can't imagine there are too many now, the Ukraine is a rough country. Long before the conflict, the current conflict, it's a rough place. I don't know why what people think that place is like, but it's rough. Okay, much rougher than Britain. There's a lot of hyperbolic stuff in the newspapers about how rough Britain is. Britain today is nowhere near as rough as it was in the 80s and 90s. Trust me. The stats are there, and I lived through it. Britain today compared to pre-war Ukraine, bro, are you having a laugh? Ukraine's way more rough than Britain. Way more rough. Okay, Usyk didn't, and obviously when Usyk was born, it was still part of the Soviet Union. Yeah, and there were all the issues that came with that. Usyk wasn't brought up with some silver spoon in his mouth, bro. He was brought up in a rough country, in a rough environment, and he would have been challenged. And he said growing up, one of the reasons he got into fighting, right, into combat sports, is to fight back against people that used to pick on him because of his name. Apparently, Usyk means whisker. So it's a strange surname, right? It means whisker. And that's why one of his boxing names was the Cat, because Usyk apparently means whisker. So he was fighting growing up. People trying to pick on him and all this kind of thing. And all the way through his amateur career, through WSB, sparring Klitschko, who was a big bully, right? Vladimir Klitschko, never mind his professional image, he's a bully type fighter. So Usyk's always been David, he's never been Goliath. If you're going up against David, going on the offensive and acting like a bully yourself is exactly what he needs to motivate him. Do you know what I mean? That, long story short, if you're going up against the David archetype, the last thing you want to do is come across in a bullying way. And that's what Team Dubois did. They came across like they were trying to bully him. You're giving him all the motivation he needs. You're giving him all the motivation he needs. Don Charles and his son were like Tweedledum and Tweedledee, Dumb and Dumber. They had no idea what they were dealing with. If you're dealing with a David archetype, not that it's going to guarantee you victory at all, but your best bet is to try and lull him into a full sense of security. Play Mr. Humble, play Mr. Nice Guy, especially at the stage of the career that Usyk is at, where he's been to the mountaintop. He's done everything, he's achieved everything, he's beaten everybody in terms of the big names. In that context, You want to be trying to, like I say, rock him to sleep, not antagonize him. If there's anything that he may lack at this stage of his career, having done all the things he's done at the age he's at, perhaps he doesn't have the same level of motivation for every single opponent. But don't give him motivation by antagonizing him. I mean, it's just total foolishness, man. Big up AJ for the super chat. He says, interview tone was as if they were talking to a former president losing power. Don going to rinse it for years, saying, I won't reveal yet. Yeah, Radio Raheem basically revealed in that interview that he's a personal friend of Don Charles. And that right away was a bit of a red flag when it came to that interview. You know, Radio Raheem generally isn't afraid to ruffle feathers and ask tough questions. But when he started off earlier on in that interview by saying that he's like a personal friend of Don Charles, and it was a Don Charles podcast, right? The fact it was a Don Charles podcast, it was like, oh dear. What are we going to get here? Softball questions? That's right, Fee Khabib, yes. Big up AJ for the super chat. Big up. Fee Khabib says, was his son the one who was talking about a street fight with Usyk? Yes, that was Don Charles' son. George Fox, his name is. He's got his mother's surname. In Circle says, Abdi saying he would pull Usyk's eye out was so cringeworthy. Usyk would ice Abdi in seconds. Yeah, I strongly suspect the same. Because the way Abdi reacted by saying, you don't want to fight me, you don't want to fight me, leave me alone, I'll pull your eyeball out, your tongue will be hanging out. Like, you're coming across all disrespectful, all up in Usyk's face, basically saying he's a quitter and all this kind of thing. When he offers you and your boys a street fight after the fight, not before the fight, after the fight, you talk your way out of it by threatening to pull his eyeball out and, Lord, leave it alone. No. That's something that someone says when they don't want to fight. They're trying to intimidate their way out of the fight by saying stuff like that. It's John Fury tactics. You don't want to fight, then you come out with all these crazy threats. Yeah? Foolishness. Sports Fan 1 says, it reminds me of when Broner was coming with this I'm from the trenches talk to Pac-Man, like Pac-Man is from Beverly Hills or something. Indeed, well, Manny Pacquiao is from a far more impoverished background than Adrian Broner. Literally, Adrian Broner grew up in Cincinnati, and Cincinnati's got some rough parts, but in terms of poverty, Cincinnati's most impoverished areas are like luxury living compared to the slums in Manila, bro. Especially when Pacquiao grew up in Manila in the 1980s or whatever. I mean, literally, the worst part of Cincinnati is luxury living compared to Manila slums. So, yeah, bizarre stuff from Broner, but it really speaks to the ignorance of an individual like Adrian Broner, knowing nothing about Pacquiao's country or where he grew up. You know what I mean? Just total ignorance. Speaks to the insular nature of a lot of people in the American boxing fraternity. Not all, but a lot. Indeed, Encircled has got it right there. Manny Pacquiao literally fought starving. You would not want to grow up in a Manila slum. You know what I mean? Ali says, Somali in a street fight, Abdi is confused. Somalis usually pull weapons in street fights, from what I've seen. So going back to that quote I gave from Magnum Force, A man's got to know his limitations. I've seen Somalis in scuffles in the street, and they usually have a weapon. You know what I mean? The first time I saw a Somali in a street fight, he was actually fighting one of my brother's friends, and he did something which I'd never seen before, but apparently a lot of Arabs do it, like Arab guys and Somalis. Um, so it was basically an Asian guy who was a friend of my brother's. I guess he was from Bangladesh or Pakistan or something. He's one of my friends. It was a friend of my brother's from college, and he and this Somali guy got into a confrontation in Leicester Square, and we just stood back and let him fight. Right? They call that a fair one in the United States. You let them have a fair one, right? They had some type of issue with each other, so we stood back and made sure there was no jumping in. Let them have a fair one, and instead of getting into a fist fight, this Asian guy and a Somali guy pulled their belts out. And they started swinging their belts at each other. I'd never seen that before. Yeah, because where I grew up, we rock it out with our fists. But these men pulled their belts out and they were swinging at each other with the belt buckles. I'd never seen that before. It was a Somali that showed me that. I'd never seen that before. Much appreciated shout out to Charlene for the super chat. He says they earned Triple D that butt whooping. Yeah, they did earn him that butt whooping. They definitely did. And to be fair to Triple D, he actually tried to, how can I describe it? At one point during one of the press conferences in the lead up to that rematch with Usyk, Dubois maybe got a little frustrated with Don Charles and George Fox and said all of this talk about faith and all of this talk about the low blow in the first fight, it doesn't matter, let's move past it. It doesn't have any bearing on the rematch. It's as if he himself thought that Don Charles and Don Charles' son were barking up the wrong tree, you know? Or maybe he felt that they were going to get him a bigger butt whooping by carrying on like that. Maybe on some subconscious level, he was thinking, yeah, these guys are poking the bear here. Don't push the horses. So much appreciated, Charlene, for the super chat. Much love. Big up Michael Schiller. To the Shower Hat Man, we appreciate the consistency on the uploads. Danny says, I'm excited for the Benavidez Yard fight. I think Yard will be a problem, but I got Benavidez by late stoppage. And me too. I think Benavidez is going to win that fight. I think his work rate will be too much. And I think Benavidez is underrated ring IQ. I think he's very clever with his offense. He's very creative. So I think Benavidez is going to take it as well. And interestingly enough, Chris Eubank Sr., and he might be the only person in boxing that thinks this, Chris Eubank Sr. has got David Benavidez, of all people, as his #1 pound for pound. Did you guys know that? Eubank Sr. thinks that David Benavidez is basically the best fighter in boxing. I don't agree with that, but I do think Benavidez is very good. Abdi says, Haney is getting KO'd, could put my life on it. We will see. That's an interesting fight, right? Devin Haney, Brian Norman Jr., I'm looking forward to it. Kyle says, Triple D is a Niger man. I saw the clip where Triple D seemed to insinuate that he had some Nigerian heritage. But then he seemed to say towards the end of that little conversation that he was just joking or something. So I'm not sure whether he does or not. His dad is Caribbean. Where are they from? Grenada or somewhere like that? So on his dad's side, he's Caribbean. Is his mom Nigerian? I don't know. Or was it all just cap from Daniel Dubois? To me, it was unclear. Yeah, SF London Rex says it was a joke. Yeah, I kind of thought that that's what Dubois was trying to do, that it was maybe just joking. And he doesn't actually have Nigerian heritage. But, them man jumped on it and they want to add him to the Nigerian roster. Big up the Niger man. Ali said he couldn't even say if he was Igbo or Yoruba. Ryan Emus says, I think Benavidez versus Yard will be very one-sided. Yard will be game, though. Speed says, the way Okoli reacted, I think he's not Nigerian. Maybe he needs to clarify. You know what I mean? Because I was a little confused. I was thinking, is Dubois joking? Was that his attempt at like some awkward little joke? Ed LB says, I believe the Dubois are from Guyana. Yes, it's somewhere like that. It's like Guyana or Dominica or something like that. Yeah. Guyana is actually in South America, but culturally it's like a Caribbean island, like one of the English-speaking Caribbean islands from a cultural perspective. It's actually on the mainland in South America. Tony S says Dubois' mom is from Nigeria. Is she? Sportsfan1 says there are other tribes. Indeed, there are. There are many, many tribes in Nigeria. It's just that the two most famous ones, and perhaps the two biggest ones, are Igbo and Yoruba. That's why people tend to go for them. Abdi says, I just think Norman will get to him. Haney's confidence is shot to bits, and the running in his last fight was insane. Yeah, the running in his last fight was insane. Haney looks traumatized. Fee Khabib says, are Eubank and Benn Jr. both proof that fighting ability is genetic and can't be taught to some degree? For both Chris and Nigel to have two boys who fight with that heart and desire can't be coincidental. Yeah, Mike Tyson, going back to him, always said that the most important thing to have above athleticism, natural power, speed, and all this type of stuff is a strong fighting spirit. It doesn't matter how gifted you are physically. If you don't have a strong fighting spirit, you'll never be anything in boxing. And that fighting spirit, I'm not saying always, but in my opinion, in the majority of cases, is something that you inherit. It's a character trait which you inherit from one, or perhaps in some cases, both of your parents. Yeah, that fighting spirit. Conor Benn has the same energy as his dad. The very same type of spirit, the very same type of demeanor, everything about Conor Benn is just like his dad. His eyes, you look at Conor Benn's eyes, it's just like his dad's eyes. In terms of the look in his eye, He's not as good as his dad, and Eubank Jr. is certainly not as good as his dad. But they have their father's spirit in them. They absolutely do. Shout out to George. Triple R says Dubois said his great-great-grandmother was a black American bare knuckle fighter. Oh, grandmother or grandfather? Dubois said his great-great-grandmother was a black American bare knuckle fighter or something? Question mark. First I've heard about that. I've heard LL Cool J say that he had some bare knuckle fighters or great boxers or something in his family lineage. Fee Khabib says, I'm trying to think of huge talents without that desire but can't. Maybe they would lose well before becoming pro. The thing about boxing is that for the vast majority of people who try boxing, you are going to get beaten up at some point. Yeah? When most people go into a boxing gym for the first time or have their first amateur bout where they get beaten up or whatever, the majority of people say, no thanks, this ain't for me. That accounts for the vast majority, trust me, that accounts for the vast majority of people who ever try their hand at boxing. The first time they get beaten up, they say, this ain't for me. And they want to leave it alone. Yeah? The ones who persevere, of the majority who persevere, a lot of them lose confidence because of the beatings they take. Yeah? So they stubbornly want to carry on, but those beatings kind of put a dent in their ego, which they never really recover from, especially when they then suffer subsequent beatings. But then you get people whose spirit is so strong that the beatings only serve to motivate them. Yeah? And it's those ones who tend to go on to become successful. The ones who are energized by receiving beatings. Fabio Wardley is a great example. Fabio Wardley, when he first stepped into a boxing gym, called out the biggest guy in the boxing gym to spar with him, and he got an absolute shellacking. All right? And in subsequent sessions, he kept going back and getting a shellacking, getting a beating. But those beatings motivated him. That's the personality type it takes to be successful in boxing. Yeah, for the most part. There are some guys who are so talented that they never really get those beatings. Yeah? But for the majority, you do get those beatings. And you're going to need a very, very strong will to not only want to continue boxing, but also not lose heart and not lose confidence when you're getting beaten up like that in amateur fights or in the gym or whatever the case may be. So the personality type that is energized and motivated when they take a beating, those are the ones that tend to go on to be successful. Shout out to First Round Boxing. Yeah, Echo Esserman versus Cattrall. That is quite an interesting fight. It's hard to know how Cattrall's going to do at 147 against a guy as strong as Echo Esserman. Skill for skill, Cattrall's on a totally different level to Esserman. But it's whether Esserman can impose that size, you know? It's an interesting fight. I would lean slightly towards Cattrall. I lean slightly towards Jack Cattrall. Yeah, I remember that story, Fee Khabib. Eubank Sr. said he was taking Jr. around gyms, seeking out beatings to see if Jr. would quit. He said a Cuban heavyweight knocked him out the ring and he got back in. That's right. He wanted to see if he had the spirit. And he does have the spirit. MC says Ben Whitaker hasn't got the heart. He's one of those guys who's talented, but it isn't in him. He's just an athlete who chose boxing. Yeah, you do get those types who are very athletically gifted and therefore talented at boxing. And their talent basically shields them from having to have that strong will, that ability to take a beating and not be discouraged. Do you know what I mean? Their talent masks that. It protects them from that to some extent. Vladimir Klitschko was one of those guys. Vladimir Klitschko was so physically superior. He was so used from day one when he took up boxing. He was so used to being physically and athletically superior to everyone he stepped in the ring with that he never had to take the kind of beatings that most people do. So he was able to get away with not having the strongest will because of his physical gifts. But eventually, of course, especially in pro boxing, that psychological weakness will be exposed and it will come back to haunt you. In the amateurs, you can get away with it a lot more easily because you're only fighting 3 rounds, right? But in the pros, it's going to come and bite you in the backside at some point. Abdi says, I feel Ben Whitaker is too sneaky to become elite, if you know what I mean. Ali says, Muhammad Ali had the greatest blend of blessed physical talent and an unbreakable spirit. Fight News says, Niki, I'm from the States, please explain. Niki means kind of like nerdy. That's the best way to describe what Niki means. Kind of like nerdy. Tony S says, what's your thoughts on Richard Riakporhe versus Tommy Welch? I haven't seen much of Tommy Welch. I know who he is. I watched his dad fight, Scott Welch, many times back in the 1990s. His fight against Henry Akinwande. His 2 fights with James Oyabola. But the son, Tommy Welch, I really haven't seen much of him. I think I might have seen one of his fights. So, I don't know. What do you think of it? Maybe you've seen more of Tommy Welch than I have. So basically, Abdi is saying just one of those nerdy anime-loving types. Is Ben Whitaker potentially the UK version of Ryan Garcia? Because Ryan Garcia is a bit sneaky, right? There's something a little soft about him. And he likes anime and all that kind of thing, doesn't he, Ryan Garcia? So, is that what we're saying Ben Whitaker is? Loads of people like anime. I mean, doesn't Izzy, right? The UFC fighter, he likes anime, doesn't he? Carol says anime is baby stuff. You got Cal in the chat. He says Izzy is fruity. That man paints his nails, doesn't he? A lot of this new stuff is weird to an old head like me. A lot of the stuff that the youngsters are doing nowadays. It's weird to old heads like me. I know some of the anime references. Super Saiyan. Is that Dragon Ball Z? Triple R says the new Frankenstein film on Netflix is very good. I'm not even a Frankenstein fan like that, but it's quite deep. Yeah, I started watching that the other day. But ended up going out and didn't finish it, so I will finish that. Yeah, I saw that interview as well, Tony S. Tony S says, I watched the Billy Nelson video recently saying Bacoli signed a contract for January and it's a fight he's been begging for. I have a sneaky feeling it may be Dubois as he randomly called him out today. I hope it's Dubois, but yeah, I saw that interview and it was very interesting, but Billy Nelson is so hyperbolic a lot of the time. I'm hoping it's not an Eddie Hearn type scenario. You know when Eddie Hearn would say, we're announcing a massive fight or a massive signing, and then Monday will come and he'll be announcing, Galalia Fai fighting somebody. It's like, yo, is that it? I thought it was going to be a massive fight. You're talking about one of the Yafai brothers fighting. Like, yo, talk about anticlimactic. Kyle says, Hatman, you seen the John Jones Hasbulla thing? No, what's going on with John Jones and Hasbulla? I don't see as much of Hasbulla on social media anymore. Is he okay? Yeah, I don't know where all this new stuff comes from, but I remember the first rapper that I can recall who came out with all the weird, chandelier earrings and wearing dresses and all this type of stuff was Young Thug. He was the first one I remember doing all that, was Young Thug. And there was a prophetic episode of the Boondocks in the early 2000s where Riley Freeman was following a rapper. I don't think it was Thugnificent. I think it was one of the other rappers. I forget the two big rappers in the Boondocks. One of them was Thugnificent and the other one, I can't remember the name now. But the one whose name I can't remember started wearing skirts. Him and his crew were wearing skirts. And Riley, being a follower of fashion, a brainless, mindless follower of fashion, he started wearing a skirt too. And when Huey started pressing him about the skirt, he was saying, this ain't a skirt. And he came up with some other name for it. So that was like predicting the direction that rap music was going to go in. And black popular culture in the United States. It was predicting where it was going. I do miss the Boondocks. Oh, damn. Don't look up Hasbulla and John Jones. You don't want to know. Now, that sounds dodgy. What? What? Now, that sounds crazy. John Jones and Hasbulla. Nah, bro. In Circle says, John was getting a little aroused wrestling with Hezbollah. That is messed up, bro. That is very, very messed up. If that's true. That's crazy messed up. People are saying John Jones was getting aroused wrestling with Hezbollah? Nah, bro. That is very, very messed up. Gangstalicious, thank you, Denzel. That's the other one. That's right. Yeah, Gangstalicious from the Boondocks. It was Gangstalicious and Thugnificent. Gangstalicious was the one that was promoting zesty behavior. That's right. Damn, so John Jones is a proper weirdo then, like super duper weirdo. What on earth is all that about? Dear, oh dear, oh dear. Shout out to D-Man for the super chat. He says, damn, I just seen the video. Looks like it's true. And shout out to the person who told me not to look up the video, because I won't be looking that up, bro. Like, nah, man. That guy's got a problem. A serious problem. President Brush says, hopefully AI. Yeah, hopefully. Dear, oh dear, oh dear. Big up D-Man for the super chat. Yeah, I saw the video of Mike Tyson and Hezbollah. He thought Hezbollah was a baby and showered, yeah. Malik says, getting aroused while wrestling with a short, stocky, pale boy is insane. Yeah, it is. It's crazy. What a weird guy. Cal says it's noncy. Of course it is. Because although Hezbollah is a man, he looks like a boy, right? He looks like a young boy. He looks like a child. In fact, I think Danny has made suggestions about this in the past, but I'm going to ask Danny here in the chat because he knows a lot more about John Jones than I do. Do you think John Jones is a psychopath, Danny? Think he's a psychopath? In Circle says, it seems to me that John really has no redeeming qualities. Okay, no username says, John has very bizarre psychology. He's like a gay alpha who dreams of dominating other men. Super weird. Well, he definitely belongs in prison then, right? He'd love it in there. Dear, oh dear, man. I'm coming like Fleece Johnson. We got D-Man for the super chat. He says, I think he absolutely is. He tries hard to be normal, but when he nearly killed Lyoto, he said it was beautiful. Big up D-Man for the super chat. La Cosa Nostra Gaming says, arguably the greatest fighter to ever live, though. Luke Pine says, didn't he nearly kill a pregnant woman in a car crash and leg it? I don't know much about John Jones. I know he's a UFC fighter. I've seen a couple of his fights over the years, but you guys know far more about him than I do. So I will defer to your knowledge on the guy. But for what you guys are telling me, he sounds like a wrong'un to say the least. Dear, oh dear, oh dear. President Brush says, gives a new meaning to rear naked choke. I've said this before, but one of the reasons that psychopaths, and I don't want to misrepresent what psychopaths are because they're not all the same, right? But one of the things that gives psychopaths, in a lot of cases, a better chance of success in whatever field they're in, whether it's crime, whether it's politics, whether it's business, etc. One of the things that gives them an advantage is the fact that they have a higher risk tolerance than most other people. Yeah? You know the old saying, nothing ventured, nothing gained. He who dares wins. Yeah? Psychopaths are more daring, generally, than normal people are. They're willing to take the kind of risks that other people are not willing to take. And when a psychopath takes a risk, they're more confident, generally, that that risk is going to succeed for them. Whereas when a normal person takes a risk, they might be frozen by fear in the process of taking that risk. Do you know what I mean? And when fear overcomes you while you're taking the risk, then the risk is more likely to fail. Whereas if you're fully in the moment and you're allowing the risk to heighten your senses and actually up your game, it increases your chances of success. Chris V says, thoughts on Matias versus Smith? I think Dalton Smith has got a pretty good chance. I would give him a better chance if he was a southpaw. It's an interesting fight. I've never really rated Matias very highly. But he is strong and tough. He's relentless. I lean to Smith slightly. But generally with crude, rudimentary pressure fighters like Matias, southpaws are their kryptonite. When they come up against southpaws, they just can't deal with it. Dalton Smith is an orthodox fighter. So I lean to Smith slightly. As I say, I've never really rated Matias at all. Tony S says, is Beterbiev still fighting on the 22nd card? That's a good question because Beterbiev has just left Top Rank. You guys heard about this? His contract with Top Rank has expired. He's now a free agent. So will that impact when and where he's going to fight? You know, whether he's going to be on that card. I don't know. But yeah, he has now left Top Rank. He's a free agent. Ed says, Hatman, any good books on psychology? Just finished The Myth of Normal. Well, I always recommend Dr. Robert Hare's seminal work on psychopathy, which is called Without Conscience. Quite an old book now. When did it come out? Late 90s, early 2000s? But it was a game changer in the field of, in the study of psychopathy. So yeah, Dr. Robert Hare, the book is called Without Conscience. That's a good place to start when it comes to studying that particular field of psychology, right? Psychopathy, the study of psychopaths. And it's long been my suspicion, right, that a disproportionately large number of psychopaths swing both ways sexually. Yeah, I've studied and observed criminal psychopaths and all sorts of other psychopaths, and it is my opinion that there is a disproportionately large percentage of them that swing both ways. And so if Danny and others are saying that John Jones is a psychopath, he would fit that profile. And that's not to say that everyone who swings both ways is a psychopath. I'm not saying that. Let's be clear on what I'm claiming here or stating as my opinion. Yeah? I'm saying that there is in my opinion, there is a disproportionately large number of psychopaths that swing both ways. A higher percentage of them, in my estimation, than is the case with non-psychopaths. And like I say, John Jones would seem to fit that profile, somebody that swings both ways. Big up D-Man for Super Chat. He says, have you seen Frankenstein? I surprisingly enjoyed it. I started watching it, but then I had to go out. I do intend to finish watching it. The new Netflix, it's a movie that came out on Netflix. It's directed by Guillermo del Toro. So yes, I did start watching it. And it was quite an interesting opening to that movie with the boat and Frankenstein coming after, well, the Frankenstein's monster coming after the actual Frankenstein doctor. Wow, Tony says, have you seen the trailer for the new Michael Jackson movie? No, I haven't. That sounds bizarre. Big up D-Man for the super chat. I will finish Frankenstein and I'll give you guys a review. This Michael Jackson movie seems bizarre. Is that real? Or is it some AI fan-made thing? A Michael Jackson movie. Encircled says, John is like a man who has worn so many masks he doesn't even know who he is anymore. He is so fake, it's unreal. He just drips with insincerity. And that's another trait of psychopaths. I was talking about this in my previous stream. That's literally how you would describe a lot of them. They wear so many masks that they forget who they are, because many people are of the view that psychopaths basically don't have a personality of their own, or because they lack the normal range of human emotions, so their core personality is very basic and robotic. You know what I mean? And you would basically describe them as somebody that doesn't have much of a personality. Outside of basic animal instincts, there isn't really much there. That's why they have to wear all these different masks. D-Man says, it is. I'm looking at the trailer now. Okay, Michael Jackson's nephew is playing Michael. Just when I thought the world couldn't get any stranger, there's a Michael Jackson movie coming out. Okay, I'll give that a look. The teaser broke records. Wow. Let me get that up here. Michael Jackson movie trailer. Let's get that up. All right, got it up here. Now watch that. So this is his nephew. Damn, his nephew looks like him. It looks like him from the Billie Jean era. Sports Fan says, in the book Confessions of a Psychopath, she has a forum with others like her, and she says all of them go both ways. It used to be a diagnostic in the checklist. Yeah, like I say, it's something I've observed when I've studied these people, and I couldn't say all of them. I don't know that to be the case, but in my observation, certainly a disproportionately large number of them swing both ways. All right, peeps, I'm going to wrap this one up here. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining the conversation. It's been great as always. And a special shout out to those who donated via Super Chat. They were Matt Borgerson, Swaggins, AJ, Charlene, and D-Man. All right, special shout out to you guys. I'll just double check I haven't missed any here. Yeah, got all of them. So much appreciated for those who donated via Super Chat. Shout out to everyone else as well who joined the conversation and was locked in. There'll be more this week. Until then, take care, be good. I'll catch you guys on the other side. I'm out.